But there are so many Filipinos in the crowd tonight, so many flags.
Unbelievable. What happened when Elena-Gabriela Ruse faced Alex Eala at the Cincinnati Open was not the kind of match anyone expected. It began as a normal UTA 1000 contest. Then, everything changed. A racket inspection request, a medical timeout, a dangerous weather suspension, a packed Cincinnati stadium watching every moment, and in the middle of it all, a Filipina star who simply refused to slow down. Alex Eala wasn't just beating Ruse, she was taking control of the entire match. And when the Romanian finally could not continue, the scoreboard told only part of the story, because behind that result was something even more important. The serve that critics once considered a weakness was suddenly creating problems for another professional player. And that may be the biggest story of all. The moment Elena-Gabriela Ruse stepped onto Court 3 at the Lindner Family Tennis Center, she came in with plenty of experience. Ruse had already defeated Magdalena Linette 6-0, 6-3 in the opening round. She had reached a career-high ranking of No. 51 in 2022 and had won the Double Tour 250 title in Hamburg in 2021. On paper, this wasn't supposed to be easy for Eala. There was history between these two players. Ruse had defeated Eala during the final qualifying round of the 2024 US Open, winning a dramatic match and preventing the young Filipina from reaching the main draw. For Eala, that defeat was another painful chapter in a season where she had already fallen in the final round of Grand Slam qualifying multiple times. 2 years later, the situation was completely different. Eala entered Cincinnati as the No. 17 seed and world No. 20. And from the moment the match started, she looked like a completely different player. She dropped her serve in the opening game, but instead of allowing that early setback to affect her, Eala immediately responded, and this is where the match began to turn. She won 5 straight games. Just like that, the early advantage Ruse had gained disappeared. Eala broke the Romanian 3 times in the opening set and started dictating almost every important exchange. The first set ended 6-1, but the score didn't fully capture how uncomfortable Ruse's was becoming. Eala was hitting with confidence. She was attacking the second serve. She was stepping inside the baseline. She was forcing errors. And most importantly, she was taking away Ruse's time. Then came the second set, and it became even more brutal. Eala broke Ruse twice and moved ahead 3-0. 9 of the previous 10 games had gone to the Filipina. The momentum was overwhelming. But then, something happened that immediately changed the atmosphere around the court. Ruse called for a racket inspection. Think about that for a second. At a major WTA 1000 event, with Eala completely controlling the match, the Romanian wanted officials to inspect her opponent's racket. The request instantly created speculation among the crowd. Was there a problem with the equipment? Was Eala's racket within the rules? Was Ruse searching for an explanation for what was happening? Officials inspected the racket, and the result was simple. The racket was legal. There was no equipment violation. The controversy disappeared almost as quickly as it had arrived. But the psychological effect of the moment was impossible to ignore, because Eala wasn't being beaten by Ruse. Ruse was struggling to find a way into the match. And that distinction mattered. The numbers made the situation even clearer. Eala fired 9 winners in the opening stretch, while Ruse had 7. But Eala also forced Ruse into 11 errors. Her return game was particularly damaging. She won 71% of the points played against Ruse's first serve and an extraordinary 78% against the second serve. That is where the pressure became obvious. Ruse simply wasn't getting enough from her service games. Her first serve numbers were struggling, and her second serve was producing even fewer points. Meanwhile, Eala's own service performance was becoming one of the most interesting parts of the match. She landed 18 of 34 first serves and won 67% of those points. But the bigger surprise came behind the second serve. Eala won 16 of 16 second serve points in the statistics provided for the match. That is the kind of number that immediately forces you to reconsider the entire story surrounding her serve. For years, Eala's service motion had been criticized. Some observers questioned its technique. Others questioned the lack of raw pace. But against Ruse, the serve was not something holding Eala back. It was helping her move forward. And that brings us to the part of this story that may be even more fascinating than the racket controversy, because Eala's serve has become one of the strangest weapons in women's tennis. Not necessarily because it is the fastest, not because it looks conventional, but but because opponents have increasingly struggled to read it. The commentator during the match pointed out the unusual spin Eala creates, especially on faster courts. The ball may not look intimidating when it leaves the racket, but the movement can make it extremely uncomfortable to handle. And then came the perfect example. Eala sent another second serve toward Ruse. It looked slow, almost too slow. Yet, because of the spin and placement, Ruse failed to control the return and sent the ball directly into the net. That was the moment the criticism surrounding Eala's serve suddenly looked very different. What if the unusual motion wasn't a weakness? What if it was part of the weapon? This is where Eala's evolution becomes so important. Her supporters have even created their own playful nickname for her unconventional service motion. The phrase became popular among Filipino fans and was later discussed publicly in tennis media. It represents something simple. The serve may look unusual, it may not fit the traditional image of a powerful Utah delivery, but it works. And Eala herself has embraced that idea. She has explained that variety is one of the keys to her service game. Instead of relying purely on speed, she uses different placements, spins, and trajectories. That approach allows her to compensate for what she may lack in raw power. And there is another weapon working alongside it, her return. Eala doesn't need to win every point with an enormous serve because she can immediately put pressure on the opponent's delivery. That combination makes her service game much more complicated than the raw speed number suggests. And the evidence didn't begin with Ruse. Her victory over Naomi Osaka in Washington provided another example. Against Osaka, Eala produced an outstanding performance behind her second serve, including a stretch where she won 9 of 10 second serve points. Osaka reportedly struggled to determine where to position herself against Eala's second delivery. That is not what you expect to hear about a serve that has been criticized for lacking power. But that's exactly why Eala's game is becoming so difficult to predict. She isn't trying to overpower every opponent. She's trying to make them uncomfortable. And once an opponent becomes uncomfortable, Eala's other weapons become even more dangerous. That is the real evolution. The serve doesn't have to be spectacular. It has to be effective. And against Ruse, it was. But then the weather intervened. With Eala serving during the fourth game of the second set, officials suspended play because of lightning and thunderstorm. The clouds had gathered over the packed stadium. The match had already become one-sided. Now the weather was forcing everyone to stop. For Ruse, the delay could have been a chance to reset. She had already taken a medical timeout to have her right foot strapped. A break in play could potentially give her time to recover physically and mentally. But there was one major problem. She had already won only 1 of the 10 games played. Eala had built too much momentum. The interruption could stop the match. It couldn't erase what had already happened. And when the players were expected to continue, Ruse ultimately informed officials that she could not go on. The match ended through retirement. There was no dramatic final point, no championship-style celebration, no long battle to the finish. Instead, Eala advanced to the round of 32 after dominating the match for roughly an hour. And yet, the controversy surrounding the racket inspection gave the match another layer, because for Eala, this wasn't simply another victory, it was revenge. Ruse had been the player who stopped her during qualifying at the 2024 US Open. That loss had kept Eala out of the Grand Slam main draw. Now, 2 years later, Eala had the opportunity to answer that defeat. And she didn't just answer it, she overwhelmed it. 6 games to 1 in the opening set, 3 games to love in the second, 9 consecutive games after dropping the opening game. Those numbers explain the dominance better than any dramatic headline could. But the larger message goes beyond Ruse. Eala is becoming increasingly comfortable against top-level opposition. Her serve is becoming more reliable. Her return remains one of her major weapons. Her confidence is growing, and the crowds following her are growing with her. That is the Eala effect. It isn't simply about winning tennis matches, it is about what happens around those matches. When Eala plays, Filipino supporters bring the flags. They follow the results across different time zones. They create their own language around her game. They celebrate the unusual. They turn every victory into a national event. And Cincinnati was another example. The crowd atmosphere became part of the story because Eala has developed something few young players can manufacture: a genuine emotional connection with an audience. But here is the question that makes this victory even more more important. If Eala's serve was once considered a weakness and it is now causing established players timing problems, what happens when the rest of her game continues improving? That is where the future becomes extremely interesting, because Eala isn't entering the next stage of her career as a finished product. She's still developing, she's still finding ways to improve, and every victory gives her another piece of evidence that the unconventional parts of her game can work at the highest level. The criticism hasn't disappeared. The questions haven't disappeared. But neither has Eala. In fact, she's answering those questions one match at a time. Against Ruse, she answered them with statistics. She answered them with returns. She answered them with serve variation. And she answered them with 9 straight games after the opening game setback. The racket inspection became a symbol of the match because it represented the desperation of an opponent searching for answers. The medical timeout became another turning point. The lightning delay created another opportunity for Ruse to recover. But none of those moments changed the fundamental reality. Eala was in control, and when the match finally ended, she had achieved something that mattered far beyond the scoreboard. She had completed her revenge, she had advanced, and she had once again shown that the player people once viewed as an emerging prospect is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Now comes the next challenge. Eala is set to face world no. 10 Amanda Anisimova in the round of 32. It will be their first career meeting according to the source material, and that matchup presents an entirely different test. But Eala enters it with something every rising player needs: belief. Her ranking has continued to climb, and with relatively few points to defend later in the season, every additional victory can create another opportunity for movement. That means Cincinnati may not be the destination. It could simply be the next stop. And perhaps that is the most frightening thought for the players waiting on the other side of the draw. Because the story isn't about a strange serve anymore. It isn't about one racket inspection. It isn't even about revenge against Ruse. The bigger story is that Alex Eala is learning how to turn every question about her game into another reason opponents have to prepare for her. The unconventional serve, a weapon. The unusual spin, a problem. The criticism, motivation, the pressure, fuel, and the Filipino crowd, an army behind her. So, was the racket inspection a desperate attempt to find an explanation for Eala's dominance? Or was there a legitimate concern that simply ended with officials confirming everything was legal? That debate will continue. But one thing is much harder to debate. Alex Eala owned the match. She transformed an early break against her into complete control. She won 9 of the next 10 games. She forced Ruse into errors. She attacked the second serve. She defended her own service games. And she walked away from a chaotic Cincinnati afternoon with another statement victory. The tennis world may still be trying to figure out exactly what Alex Eala is becoming. But perhaps that's the point. She's not following the traditional blueprint. She's creating her own. And if this is what the Eala effect looks like now, imagine what it could look like when the rest of her game reaches the level she believes it can reach. Cincinnati didn't just give Alex Eala another win. It gave her another chapter, another piece of revenge, another reminder that her unusual style can work, and another warning to everyone standing across the net. Alex Eala is no longer asking for permission to belong at this level. She's taking her place, and the tennis world is starting to notice. So the question remains, is the tennis establishment ready for the Eala effect? Or are they still trying to understand the player who has already moved past them? If you enjoyed this deep dive into Alex Eala's controversial Cincinnati victory over Elena-Gabriela Ruse, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more tennis drama, major match breakdowns, and the latest stories surrounding Alex Eala. And tell us in the comments, was the racket inspection a desperate move from a frustrated opponent, or do you think Ruse had a legitimate reason to question the equipment? Because after everything that happened in Cincinnati, one thing is certain: the Eala effect is getting stronger.